along now, the doctors estimate that I'll be out of the hospital around Christmas time. I'm planning on Thanksgiving. I haven't mentioned that to them yet, but I plan to in the next few days.
Being able to perhaps become even more emotionally involved in it was perhaps of some value, and I think certainly the highlight of it, this whole experience, was sitting with my son Teddy and Pat Wright, and we were, I think, about 55 or 65 rows back at the time of the signing of this in the White House. But we were back there with a lot of the people that had made the difference, and that was the place to be.
The second really kind of moving thing was for me sitting at the signing ceremony. I sat next to Kennedy, and the senator leaned over to me and said, "He had a horrible dream last night." And I said, "Oh, what was that, sir?" And he said, "I dreamt that Bush read the bill." He wouldn't sign it. And that was, we were all kind of holding our breath that people would actually find out what was really in it. This was a piece of legislation that would radically change, at a minimum, the United States, and as we've seen in the last 10 years, the world.
Being able to perhaps become even more emotionally involved in it was perhaps of some value, and I think certainly the highlight of it, this whole experience, was sitting with my son Teddy and Pat Wright, and we were, I think, about 55 or 65 rows back at the time of the signing of this in the White House. But we were back there with a lot of the people that had made the difference, and that was the place to be.
The second really kind of moving thing was for me sitting at the signing ceremony. I sat next to Kennedy, and the senator leaned over to me and said, "He had a horrible dream last night." And I said, "Oh, what was that, sir?" And he said, "I dreamt that Bush read the bill." He wouldn't sign it. And that was, we were all kind of holding our breath that people would actually find out what was really in it. This was a piece of legislation that would radically change, at a minimum, the United States, and as we've seen in the last 10 years, the world.
We began this evening with what was to be a long conversation with Senator Edward Kennedy. He has served in the Senate for more than 40 years. People on both sides of the aisles will tell you that he is one of our great senators. He has a remarkable legislative history. He knows and loves the Senate as an institution. He is part of the institution, and he understands what makes it work, that it requires reaching across to people on both sides of the aisle. We didn't get to do that interview today because of interruptions. We look forward to having another conversation with Senator Kennedy at another date. Here is a part of what we did today. Senator Edward Kennedy in conversation at his office in Washington.
Do you think where you are on important issues of our day is where the country is, or where you'd like to see the country be?
Where I'd like to see the country be. I believe that the individuals and the nation does best when it's challenged. I think this country has demonstrated it over its history. I mean, look how this nation came out of the Depression. Look how we've responded in terms of World War II. Look how we've even finally, when we were confronted the issues of segregation by Dr. King, really facing us, even though we've written slavery into the Constitution and we've had Civil War. Finally, when Dr. King confronted us, we responded. We made important progress in knocking down walls of discrimination. This country's always done well when it's been challenged. I don't feel that it's being challenged. You can't have the tax cuts we've had and be still involved in wars on this and asking a small group of people to take the burden and everybody else enjoy themselves. I think we have to understand now that we're facing a very different challenge, and that is the issue of globalization. And we're either going to get run out of town with the rush towards lower wages and outsourcing, or we're going to embrace it and say we are going to equip every citizen in this nation with the ability to be able to deal with the problems of globalization, and that way ensure we're going to have the strongest economy in the next 20 and 30 years, and we will have a national security that'll be second to none. And we, I think, are pretty much dead in the water. The administration's policies are catching up with them. That's another issue. But I think just generally speaking, this country does best, individuals do best, and we welcome these challenges. Americans like this, but we're not, that's not part of the whole political discussion at this time. And I think it's both. I think that's where we ought to be as a political party, and where we ought to be as individuals.
And it's a role for the leaders of the party to step forward and say, this is where we ought to be. We ought to be challenging America to do better.
It's not really, that doesn't even have to be a Democratic. It's where Americans will be. And I think intuitively and instinctively, people welcome that. They want to be involved. There's great sense of pride that we see reflected in the personal courage of the Americans who are serving in Iraq, what we saw on 9/11, the extraordinary bravery and courage of individuals. We used to talk about the greatest generation, we still do. That kind of, those kinds of efforts that we saw from people, you know, I don't like to use the word average people, but working families, working people, personal kind of courage of those men and women, that's out there. People are proud of this country, and they would welcome it. And that's what we're missing.
Do you then believe that those Republicans, like George Bush and Karl Rove and others who say we are beginning decades of Republican dominance, you look at the House, look at the Senate, look at the presidential election, are simply wrong? It is because Democrats haven't articulated a vision for the future that has...
Well, it's part the second, and I think we ought to welcome the Republicans who want to talk about values. We'll talk about them. What about the value of work? And the giveaways to the wealthiest individuals versus the failure to increase the minimum wage.
So minimum wage and tax cuts and all that.
What about just sort of truthfulness on single-source contracts to Halliburton and not providing body armor to American servicemen in Iraq? I think the whole issues in terms of what's happening to our cities and poverty and our moral issues, we could talk about that. But I think beyond that, we need to look at what the central challenge is for us as individuals and for our country. And I think most of us understand, and the great philosophers pointed out, the great struggle between good and evil, between challenge and response. Toynbee coined it. It's
right. The
world is challenge and response. And this country has always done better in terms of challenge. And what we're just doing now is just sort of responding to the tides that are coming our way. And I think that it's not what this country really is about. Final point. You know, the Democratic Party is willing to take on very tough issues. We took on the tough issues, as we should have, in terms of desegregation. But as a result of that, as we know, it was a changed party situation in the South. The solid South that was Democratic has shifted and changed. Democrats took on the environment. That was a division between the environmentalists and workers to core constituencies. That has changed. We took on the issues of war and peace over a period of time, and that's divided the country. Because of that, we have paid for it in terms of the politics of the
being able
time.
to
So
perhaps
a lot of the difficulties
become even more emotionally involved.
And I still have not heard the Republicans from wanting to repeal the Medicare or repeal Social Security or repeal what we have done in terms of higher education, which were basically the efforts that were made by Democrats. But we've paid a political price for that, and rather than retreating from it, that we ought to understand that that's really a stamp of pride.
The second really
But we ought to be looking
thing
for
was
the
for
future
me
now.
sitting
What
at the
ought to be
signing
the debate about
ceremony.
Iraq at
I
this
sat
time?
next to Kennedy.
Well, I think it's
And,
the
the
debate ought
senator
to be
leaned over
really
to me and said
how
he had a horrible
with the
dream
extraordinary
last night.
success
And
of
I
the
said, "Oh,
elections,
what was that, sir?" And
which
he said,
gives the Iraqis
I dreamt
the
that Bush read the
opportunity
bill. And he wouldn't
for
sign
them
it.
to say, "This is our country."
And that was,
This
we
is
were
our
all kind of
country,"
holding our
which
breath
is,
that people would actually
it's not
find
an
out what
extension
was
of the
really
United
in it.
States.
This was a
We're not
piece of
going to have the
legislation
United States calling all
that
the shots,
would
setting
radically
up
change
the
at a minimum the United
times, the
States,
dates, the
and as we've
Constitution,
seen
and
in
all
the
the rest.
last
But
10
we are going
years,
to
the
do
world.
it. That was enormously important. Now
We
they
began this
need
evening
the
with what
training.
was to
They need
be
the training,
a long
to
conversation
be
with
able
Senator
to
Edward
defend
Kennedy.
their own
He has
country.
served in the Senate
My
for
own
more
belief
than
is
40
so much
years.
of the insurgency
People on
is
both sides of the
a
aisle will
reflection
tell you that he is one of our
the
great
Iraqis
senators.
feel that our presence
He has a
there
remarkable
is part of an
legislative history.
occupation, not a
He
liberation.
knows and loves the
And
Senate
that's
as an
explained
institution.
in a
He
host
is
of
part of
different
the
kinds of ways
institution,
because
and he
we never had a
understands what
plan.
makes it work.
We had a plan
that
to
it
win the war, but
requires
not win
reaching
the
across
peace.
to people
And there's been
on both
blunder
sides of
after
the
blunder
aisle.
after
We
blunder,
didn't get to do
which
that
we have
interview today
participated, but in the
because
basic
of
back of the
interruptions.
mind of the
We
Iraqis
look forward
is that
to having
here
another
is this
conversation with
all-powerful
Senator
nation.
Kennedy
They can go
at
to the
another
moon
day.
or back and
Here is
win
a
this
part
conflict
of what we
many
did
miles away
today.
in 3 days, and
Senator
they can't
Edward Kennedy
provide
in
electricity.
conversation
They can't
at
get the
his
sewage
office
out.
in
They
Washington.
can't provide jobs.
Do you think
they can't
where you are
provide the
on important issues of our
restoration or the
day
rebuilding
is where the
of
country
Fallujah.
is, or where you'd like to see the
why
country
don't they
be?
do this? Why can't they?
Where
do
I'd like
this?
to see the
And
country
I think
be.
there's a
I believe
sense
that individuals
we are part of
and the nation does
occupation.
best when it's
My sense
challenged.
is,
I think this country
with the,
has demonstrated it
General
over
Abizaid
its history.
testifying
I mean,
before the Armed
look
Services
how this
Committee,
nation came
which
out
I
of the
remember
Depression.
last
Look
week,
how
said
we
they're getting
responded in terms
2,500
of World War
Iraqis
II.
today
Look
that
how
wanted
we've
to join
even
the new
finally,
Iraqi army.
when
That's
we were
enormously
confronted the
encouraging.
issues
We
of,
know how to train the best armies
of segregation.
My
by
wife
Dr.
has
King,
a nephew
really
at
facing
12
us, even
weeks
though
of
we've
training.
written slavery
we
into
had
the
a couple of
Constitution
weeks
and we
off,
had the Civil
went
War.
up
Finally,
to Fort
when
Lewis,
Dr. King
got his
confronted
gear,
us, we
went,
responded.
supposed to have a
We've
month,
made important progress in
Kuwait
knocking
didn't,
down walls of
and is,
discrimination. This
sitting on
country's
the
always
back
done well
of a
when
striker
it's been
as
challenged.
the
I don't
heavy
feel that
machine
it's being challenged.
In
You
Iraq.
can't have
In Iraq,
the
the
tax
12
cuts
weeks of
most
training
had and
prepared
be
to
still
fight,
involved
prepared
in
to fight,
wars
and the best in the
on
world,
this and
and the
asking
best
a
in the
small
world,
group of people
mind
to
you.
take the burden and everybody else
and
enjoy
was
themselves.
just in Massachusetts
I
a couple
think
of days
we
ago
have
and
to
met
understand
Joe McDermott,
now,
United States Marine Corps,
that we're facing a very
that
different
had
challenge.
8 weeks
and that is the issue of
Paris
globalization.
Island,
And we're either going to get run out of
boot camp,
town
4 weeks
with
at
the
Quantico,
rush towards
20 days
lower
home,
wages,
went out to
outsourcing, or
Pendleton,
we're going to
had
embrace
2
it
weeks out
and
there
say
in the
we are
Vietnam
going to
War,
equip every
flew
citizen in
in a
this
continental
nation
plane
with
to
the ability
Saigon,
to
and
be
30
able to
hours
deal
later
with
was
the
getting shot
problems
at
of
by the Viet
globalization.
Cong.
And in that way,
We had the
ensure
best. The
we're going
Marines
to
were
have
the
the
best.
strongest
So one of the
economy
debates ought to be,
in
why
the
aren't we
next
spending
20
Iraq
years,
faster?
and
Let them
we
do
will
it.
have
Give
a
them 8
national
months.
security
Give them
that'll be
12
second
months.
to none.
Give them 15
And
months.
we,
Let
I think,
the
are pretty
Iraqis
much
now
dead
defend their own
in the
country.
water. The
Let's let them,
administration's policies are catching up with them. That's
as
another
they have
issue.
at the polls, at the heads of the
but I
voting,
think just
that this is
generally
their
speaking,
country. They
this
ought to be
country
willing
does
to
best.
defend it.
Individuals do
And
best.
with that,
and we
United
welcome
States
these
can,
challenges. Americans like
see,
this,
but
as
we're
a
not.
goal,
That's not
phasing
part
out
of the
American
whole
military
political
presence
discussion
at
at
this
this
time.
time.
And I
With
think
an
it's,
exit strategy,
both,
would you suggest 15
I think
months
that's
or
where
2
we ought to
years
be
or
as a
1 year?
political
by the
party
end
and
of
where we ought to be as
2006.
individuals.
And as a role for the leaders of the party
It
to
is.
step
That
forward and
is
say, this is where we ought to be. We ought to be
set.
challenging America.
Now that
to
gives
do
them all the
better.
way through the
It's not really, that
remainder
doesn't even have to be a
of this year.
Democrat.
It gives them more.
It's where Americans